Hey friends and everyone, welcome back to Netcode-Hub channel. I have released my first ever .NET project template, which encapsulates clean architecture and secure RS pattern. Now in that, I told you that, hey, I'll come out with another video which will talk about test. Now in this test, we're going to look at how the dependencies have been structured. When you take a look with the clean architecture diagram, I have one here, so let me put it on the screen so you can see that. Can you see it now? Or you can still see me, right? Okay, so you're gonna see it soon. Yes, there you go. All right, so you can see from here that in clean architecture, we are having 4 layers, which is our web UI, our presentation, which is the same as the presentation. We have the infrastructure project, we have application, and our domain. Now, aside from only this web UI, the rest are C# libraries, and I believe you know that. Yes. Okay, so within that, you see these are the dependencies, how each depends on the other. Now, they all depend on the domain. As you can see from here, domain is your business logic. That is the heart, the center of your application. That is what you're going to work around. Now, when you take a look with the application is an orchestrator which orchestrates services and repos between the infrastructure. So when you look at this, the application depends on the domain. And also, when you look at the infrastructure, which houses your data access, which persists data to database, and in case you have an external service that you're making a call with, such as payment systems or payment APIs, email APIs, or whatever, any third party service that you're going to be calling is going to be housed in the infrastructure. Okay, and that is the infrastructure of your project. Now look at the web UI, which is the presentation. The presentation here, it is dependent on the application. So this application here becomes like a port, which the presentation connects with. And that the application also has implementation in the infrastructure, which they all benefit from the domain. Now, within this, when a request comes in from the UI, because in the UI, that is where you're going to expose your endpoint, isn't it? Your API endpoint. Now, when your endpoint is being hit by a call, it needs to go through the application. So that's the reason why you have from the presentation straight to the application, right? Now, this application also needs the domain because that is what your business. Now, in that, since you're going to be working with a third-party service or even your database, infrastructure needs to be called. So from application, we go to the domain with the infrastructure. And now here from the infrastructure, it references the application because all your interfaces are being constructed or created in the application. Its implementation or its go about is found in the infrastructure. Now, we implemented the same thing here in our project. So when you check here, we having our source, and in that we created our 4 projects: domain, application, infrastructure, and our presentation. So let's add our XUnit framework. So right click on text, then we're going to add new project. We can search for XUnit from this. I want to make sure that we have the C#. So once you're done with this, we need to install some packages here. So let's get these packages installed. So the first package that we're going to be installing is netarchitects.rules. So this houses all the rules that we can use. And let's get this installed. We also need shouldly. These are the 2 packages that we need to get this working. All right, so now that we are done, let's go to a solution. Then in here from this test framework that we have added, we can get, since we're going to be creating or we're going to be testing all these 4 layers, it's better that we have a base class to hold on the reference or the assembly of this. Okay, so that we can call this anywhere and work with it. So I'm going to have a base text over here, maybe like this base text. Now, or we can have base assembly, whatever name that you give it to this, fine. Now, this should be a class. Now, with this class, we are going to get the assembly for these 4 layers. So how do we get this? We can pick a class from each layer and then reference it and get its assembly. So I have a sample here. So when you look at this, we are using assembly. Then we want to get this domain assembly. We want to get this application assembly. We want to get this infrastructure and our presentation. In this, they correspond with what we have in here, application, domain, infrastructure, and then the presentation. Now in here, we want to grab a file or a class here and then get it assembly. We are not actually focusing on the class itself, but rather I want to focus on the assembly this class can be found. So that's what you want to get. Okay, so that's the reason why we're using this type of. Now look at that. In our application, let's say this is a domain. In a domain, I created a to-do task as a demo to show you how this template works and how you can integrate it with your project. So with this, we can go and include that because this domain has this tax. So we can go and now include the reference here. But before we can do it, let's go and reference this. So go to dependencies, add project reference, and then let's add this presentation because this presentation has all of these layers referenced, right? So we can add this, and as soon as we add that, we can have access to this. So let's do it again. Now using project, we can have access to this. Also with the application, that is where we implemented a CQRS pattern. So we have in our command, create to do command. If I check from here in our, let's say from the features, we're having this to do. We have this create, and that's where we have our command. So we can reference this and now get the assembly of this. So that is this one. Now let's make reference here too. And now the infrastructure houses the AppDB context, and I believe you know this. So we're going to reference that. And then with our presentation, we have the program.assembly, right? So that's the program file. So when you look at this, we have a program file from the presentation. Then you open it and you can see we having this program file over here. But this program file, as soon as we reference it here, we're going to have some issue because this is internal class. It is not public, but you want to grab it here. So the best thing that we can do here is to create a partial class of this so that we do not have any issue with this. Let's go to the program again from the presentation. And then in here, let's have a partial class. So just put it down here. Now this partial class has nothing, but it is just a partial class to know that way it is part of this program.cs file, and we can reference it to get this program file that we need. You can also look at any file at all that you want to reference, such as you see we are having this service collection, application builder extension, migration extension. We can just grab this file and get this assembly. But the right thing to do here is to get the program file, since that is the starting point of your infrastructure. So I can just have a different or separate namespace and then say that this is the project name. Now let's see what's the project name from this. This is the clean architecture template, and here I have the project name dot presentation. So I can have this from here. And then in there, I can have this public, should be a partial. Then let's call that program. So when you look at this, I think this is using this Visual Studio Test Platform.test host. let's say that's not what we're looking for. So with this, we can use the namespace that we created, that is using project name.presentation, because you want to reference to this assembly, presentation assembly, not the this XUnit framework. Okay. All right. So now that we have this created and stored nicely, we can go and create our architecture test now. So let's go and create a class to handle that. Let me just minimize all this so it can look simple. Then let's have our class. So maybe I can put this in folder. Let me add new folder here. And that is a layers. And then add a layer test. Now with this layer test, we having our 4 layers. So let's first look at the domain layer. So again, when you check our diagram, the domain layer, it is the center right layer for the whole architecture. Now this domain layer should not depend on any. Now, the rest should depend on this domain because that is the business. That is what you're going to work on in your project. So this should be in the center and this should not have any dependency. So let's go and check. We can check that domain layer should not depend on applications, should not depend on infrastructure, and it should not depend on presentation. So maybe later on, if you have created a class and you are using that in the domain, then this can fail. So let's have a look with that with the domain layer. Then we take the layers one by one. Okay, we see the dependencies and we see the ones that should not depend on with that. So when you look at what we have here, that's our first text. You want to say that domain layer should not depend on application. So when you look at the diagram here, we're saying this domain should not depend on this application. Rather, application here should depend on domain, right? So we have this first test. Let's check it out. So you can see we're having this result. We get this assembly that you want to put in test, and it should not coming from the package that we installed shouldly, and have the dependencies from the net text rules. And then we are saying that you want to specify the application layer and then get the results. And this results should be true. Let's have a look and test this out. So we are having one test and we want to wait and see the response. Currently we have none of them. It is not successful yet, but it is still in progress. So let's wait for that. Yeah, I can see that one test passed, so it is passed. No error, no warning. Yes, so that means our domain is not dependent on application. Okay, so let's put this down here. When you pick this domain layer, it should not depend on any of the layers. So we can use for each loop to loop through that, get a list of these assemblies, and I'll loop through it. So we can have it once because you're following the same pattern. Domain should not depend on application. Domain should not depend on presentation, and domain should not depend on infrastructure. So let's have that. Instead of repeating this a couple of times, let's have it as string. So in here, all that we're going to be doing is to grab this application assembly, and then we're going to paste it here. That's the first one. It should not depend on application. You want to look up for infrastructure, and then you want to look up for the next last one. That is a presentation assembly. So now that we have this list, what we're going to be doing here is to loop through this. So in here, we can use for each. Then we say that all the assembly in this assembly list we want to grab this, paste this, and instead of using a specific library assembly here, we want to replace it with this assembly because we have them here. And this is going to run 3 times and all should pass. Let's have a look. So we're going to say that domain should not depend on any layer. You see? Good. Now let's run this and check it out. Okay, so it is passed. Now when we check here, so domain should not depend on any layer and it is passed. It means it was able to run all this and this does not depend on any of the layers. Yeah, so we are good here. Now let's have a look with the next one. When we check maybe the application, this application should depend on this domain and it should not depend on infrastructure here, but it should also not depend on web UI. This should depend on what? Domain only. Let's look at that. So let's have application. So with this two, you can see we are saying the application should not depend on any except what? Domain. Now with this, we can grab the same thing from here. And then the assemblies that we have, we want to take off this. So we have infrastructure and then we have presentation. Application should not depend on any. Now let's go and grab our test results. So we're going to use the same for each loop and then loop through these two assemblies. So here, this application that we have should not have dependency on this assembly. That's infrastructure and presentation. The result should be true for all. Okay, so let's run this and check this out. Before that, we need to make sure we have this fact marked. Okay, so let's test this. Yes, and it is running. So let's wait and see. Okay, so that's also passed. So application should not depend on this, and you can see it is passed. So this application layer does not depend on infrastructure. It does not depend on presentation. So let's also test the infrastructure. We know that infrastructure should not have dependency on presentation, right? So let's have a copy here and do that. Because when you check from this, infrastructure, it depends on application for implementation, and also it needs the domain. So it is only the presentation that infrastructure should not depend on. I believe you are getting the idea here. So let's have this check. So we can call this infrastructure assembly and should not have dependency on. We can get this presentation assembly.get name, and then we can have the name. The result should be true. We can test this out. Okay, so this works and that is it. So it is not depending on presentation. Okay, so the last part here that we're going to look at for is the presentation. Now with the presentation, so here's infrastructure. And then presentation. Now let's go again and check it out. So from the presentation, if I open this presentation layer, you check the project and now it's referencing, it depends on infrastructure, it depends on application, it depends on domain. So we can say that for infrastructure or for presentation, it completely depends on all the layers here, but it does not depend directly on the application and the domain. Rather, it depends directly in the infrastructure, and infrastructure also depends on application and it follows. You see? So with infrastructure, we cannot write test for this. We cannot only test if it actually depends on. But since we have configured it and we know that it depends on, we need not to waste our time be checking that. Yes. All right, guys. So by doing so, we can be rest assured that we are following the rule guiding clean architecture. All right. So you can look at this and implement this in your project. When you create a project without using my template, you can also integrate this clean the architecture test to see the dependencies between your layers. All right. So I believe you guys enjoyed this. If you did, then give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, then you do that, and do not forget to click on the bell icon so you never miss out any of my upcoming content. All right, so I'm going to catch up again. Until then, take care. But before that, if you haven't gotten a copy of this template and if you want to get it with this current test that I have integrated, I'm going to make it available at GitHub. So I'll put the link in the video description so you can just go in and grab a copy now. All right, so take care and see you again.